right. Looks like it's time to get started. Good evening, everyone. Good evening, all you beer nerds, newbies, and know-it-alls. Welcome
beer
to
cats
the
and beer kittens.
beer. That's my wife said the same thing, that it reminds her of Carol Baskin, and I guess she's not the only one. Well, welcome everybody to the 12 Beers of Christmas craft beer experience. My name is Brian Hathaway.
And I'm thirsty. Also, my name is Julie Walker.
Let's open night four's beer.
Take it on over to BoxCam, Brian.
Take it away, BoxCam. Thank you, BoxCam. Beautiful night four. Let's dig in. Oh, my package already sustained some damage over night four. Get that out of there. We got a sticker in there, and I think that's probably...
I'm loving all these stickers. I feel like I'm not going to have any more room on my computer because I'm just like slathering the top of my laptop with all these fun stickers. This is like, there are worse problems to have.
That's what the tops of laptops are meant for.
Exactly. Yeah.
Just film with stickers. We have the wonderful Pen Quarter Porter from DC Brau. Oh, you have one there too.
I do. Look at that.
Wow.
Lucky. Can you say the name of this beer 5 times fast?
Probably, but I don't think the audience wants to hear me do that.
Pen Quarter Porter. I love it. I love the name.
Yeah. So this is a great porter, a little 5.5% dark malty bad boy. And as we get our beer poured out,
BoxCam is still in on the action there, Brian. BoxCam is still leading your pour.
Oh, I'm the worst. I had this beautiful pour here in the recommended glass.
I got you covered.
Look at that. Beautiful
very
pour,
different
Jules.
glasses.
Beautiful pour. Nice chocolate notes from Kirk. I would agree. I get a little bit of smokiness too, but there's really nice chocolatey to it.
Yeah, Z-Man saying how light it is. I always like that about like if you have like a Guinness or something, people say, oh, it's such a heavy beer. It's a stout. It's really not. I mean, it's like this. It's a nice, light, drinkable. Yeah, definitely surprisingly light.
Something that you can enjoy while also getting your coffee, roasty, malty fix. So
it's really good.
Like I said, tonight we'll be joined by another special guest. We're going to get more into malt, dark malts, light malts, all the grains that are going to play into making a beer. And of course, we'll be answering some of your questions live.
Yes. So just like last night, feel free to use the Q&A section. That's where you can go and you can ask your questions. We'll try to answer some of those, most of those live if we can. Use this chat like you're using it right now to talk to each other, share your reactions to the beer, and just kind of enjoy each other's company in the chat. If you would like us to answer a question, be sure to make it go into the Q&A.
And everybody say hi to Kate. Kate, say hi to everybody. She'll be moderating the Q&A, helping us out when she thinks there's some good questions for us. Hi, Kate.
Hey, guys. Happy Monday.
Happy Monday.
Happy Monday.
I want every Monday to be like this, Brian. Can this be every Monday?
This is better than most Mondays. Yeah, cracking open a nice beer here.
Exactly.
Definitely.
Cool. So, what are you getting from this beer, Julie? I said I agreed with Kirk. I got a little bit of chocolatiness. How about you?
Yeah, I like that. I like the chocolate. It's almost more like a bittersweet chocolate. I like that it's not too sweet. So I don't like things that are super sweet. So I like that it's a bit drier. It's really, definitely really good. So I feel like I also really go for things that are roasty, like coffee. So like that good roasty flavor. And I feel like I'm enjoying that roasted malt so much that I just want to talk to somebody about it. Somebody who maybe knows a bit more about roasting malt and knows a bit more about that. So lucky for us, we do have somebody with us tonight who can speak to this style. So let's do a nice little introduction.
Yeah, let's get to it.
I'm going to stop that now.
Coming. All right. So please welcome the Baron of Beer, the Maven of Malt, the Goat of Goza, the King of the Craps Table, COO of City Brew Tours / our boss, Barry Hansen.
Hey guys, we are going to have to talk about your use of business property and stickers, but we'll have that discussion at a different time. So
this is my personal computer.
This is also my personal computer. You look oddly familiar to me right now. I feel like we just saw each other a couple days ago.
Or maybe a couple hours ago at work. I don't know.
Did
Yep.
you shave or color your beard? I feel like it was white. I don't know. Maybe I'm imagining things.
Oh, I don't know about that.
Definitely couldn't be anything else. Just the work thing. Let's move on. So Barry, we're going to talk about malt and grain and, of course, beer tonight. But I think a good starting point would be to define some terms for people, to put some like even ground between everybody. So what is malt?
So malt is one of the natural pieces of beauty in beer. Malt is actually grain, so a barley seed that has been soaked and germinated. And then right when it's full of this nice rich starch and it has these enzymes locked up inside, they actually dry it out and stop it from germinating any further. So it can't become a new plant. And
So
what's
like
beautiful
tricking it.
about that is they trap everything inside that we need to make beer. It's amazing. It's like this little self-contained unit that just makes beer for us. So with that, then as it's being dried, they're able to control a whole bunch of different factors of it. And so I don't know if one of the things you wanted to get into in terms of the terms is maybe some of the vocabulary around that. But what they do is they actually dry these out at different temperatures, controlling different colors and flavors. So
Almost like cooking it.
Yes, absolutely. Just like cooking it. But some of them are dried out really, really slowly and at lower temperatures. So they give you that really light base color and very little flavor. It's more about getting the sugar and what's going to actually become that beer. So, you kind of use those throughout your Pilsners, all the different lighter pale ales. And then as you work your way up in those temperatures of how they're drying them out, you're actually changing a lot of the properties. And that's a little bit more similar to the cooking in that respect, because then you get a little process called the Maillard reaction. And so you maybe have had a toast before, and you've actually gotten that nice caramelization kind of on the outside, a little bit of browning. Not talking about necessarily the burnt nature, but just that nice even toast. And that's the process actually from the Maillard reaction, which contributes to all these different levels of grain that we can have in our beer.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think that, so thinking about those terms, there's a question that often comes up around terms as it relates to beers that have, more roasted grain in them. So I know we have porters and we have stouts, and I feel like there's a lot of confusion around that. I know a few of the things that I know about it have to do with using malted barley in porters versus using more unmalted barley in stouts. I know that porters tend to be a little bit lighter in body, but Brian or Barry, other things that kind of differentiate those two when we're talking about them, or are they interchangeable?
So there is a little bit of a difference, but it is so askew at this point. There's different stories from history and background behind each of the styles, but they really are closely interchanged. And what I think is really unique about tonight's beer, this is actually kind of right in the middle, calling it a robust porter. So it's not just a porter or a stout. It kind of hits that middle ground.
Mm-hmm.
And it's one of the few porters that you'll see that actually has a bunch of different grains in it. And I wonder if your audience has any idea how many different grains are in this beer.
That's a very, very good question, Barry. Any guesses, chat? How many grains in this beer? 5.
Like how many different types of grain? Yep.
What's a lot? What would you define as a lot of grains in a beer, Barry?
I think Liana's answer of 100 might be a lot, but I don't know. I'm just
Might be
guessing.
a little high.
Yeah, there are hundreds of different malts though. And
Nice.
I actually saw somebody mention in the chat about like any grain, not necessarily just barley. And so absolutely, like barley is the king of the crop, so to speak. And it's used across all the different beers for the most part. But people will malt wheat, and there's breweries that are looking for gluten-free alternatives that are doing things like quinoa and millet. So all these different things can be turned into it. But there is actually a couple people that got the answer correct. The answer is actually 6.
Shout out to
Awesome.
Wet the Whistle.
Matt and Wet the Whistle, who was definitely wetting their whistle, I'm sure.
Yeah, so there's actually 6 different levels of grain in this one beer. And it does include different levels of malt and what you were talking about, Julie, some of that barley, because they wanted that really robust nature. And you can kind of taste that in the beer, hopefully, where it just pushes the envelope of not being so sweet and coming across as almost a coffee character. you're getting a lot of that from that roasted barley that's not actually been malted. They just took the barley dry off the plant, and they were able to use that after roasting. So it gives it a rich flavor that you can kind of feel lingering around in your mouth.
That kind of leads me into a question that came from John in the Q&A section here. To really appreciate the flavors in a porter or a stout, what's your favorite glass to drink porters? And do you have like a recommended temperature that these beers should be consumed at?
Good question.
So beer's really like, I love beer. I live for beer.
Good, that's why you're here.
So I do usually drink a porter like this out of something with a slightly wider lip, so like a tulip or a goblet. Yep, something like you've got there, Brian. Absolutely. Although tonight I did switch it up because I do have a glass from DC Brau just by chance and thought it was appropriate.
Represent. Yeah. I'm using a no-nick pint myself. If you see
Very
this that
nice.
has the little bump, it makes it nice and easy to hold.
But regarding temperature, that's probably the most interesting question about beer. I actually have a fridge in my house and I keep it set at 46 to have some of my beers that I want to cellar, similar to what you might do with wine. But kind of the best rule I was ever given in terms of beer is the temperature can always come up. So I always recommend starting colder and allowing it to warm up as you drink it, because you're going to notice different flavors at each stage through that process.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I do the same thing. I keep my beer fridge at like 36. And then if I have something that I want to let warm up and let those flavors really develop, I'll just take it out early.
Yeah.
If I remember.
And Barry, you mentioned aging beer. That also leads into another question we have from Bill in the Q&A. So how do you know which beers would do well by cellaring them for a while? Is there kind of a rule of thumb as far as what type of beer benefits the most from aging?
Beer is best drank fresh, but there's always experimentation to be done. So in terms of aging, you really don't want to age anything with huge hop content that's designed to be like, those hazy IPAs that are out now. You absolutely don't want to be aging those. You want to be drinking those in a couple weeks. But anything that has the richer malt profile or a much higher alcohol content is going to change a lot over time. And so those are typically what you see coming out of that barrel process, much like you do with like something like a whiskey that's going to go into that barrel and be aged. Beer is then sometimes aged in those barrels afterwards.
Yes, I just want to follow up on the chat. We got a lot of different glasses out there. Steve's T says he's drinking out of a clean glass, which is something everybody should do with every glass that you're using. The beer guide, there's another beer guide in here. Who are you? Name yourself. They said they're drinking out of their Yeti. I assume that they're drinking out of a Yeti mug and they didn't just dump their beer into a Yeti cooler and are drinking out of the corner of that cooler. If you did, please get some help. Get yourself a glass for starters. Screw top canning jar. That's another cool one. You could definitely get a good look at the glass, good look at the beer through the glass. And that kind of leads me into my next question. Keller. And what role does Keller really play in grain or play in beer? And really, could you go into what makes malt so special to the beer?
Yeah. So malt is really amazing because once you get that process started of turning it into malt, and those temperatures start to control what that end product will look like. Most brewers have a very specific base malt that they use, and it's dried out really slowly at say 130, 140 degrees Fahrenheit. So just lower than you'd even cook something at home in terms of temperature, and nice and slow. And that's going to give you all those sugars and all that base for the beer. And brewers will use that interchangeably. Like this porter might have the same base malt as their pale ale, but then it's all these next levels of malt that's going to really dial in that beer. And so we talked about how this one has 6 different levels. That's essentially because at your base malt, you're getting all that sugar. And then you go up a little, like a next stage, you get a little bit darker, but not much. And you get things like Munich and Victory malt. And those are going to give you like a more nutty, bready character. And then you can go up a little bit higher and you start to get a much bigger Maillard reaction there. And you start to get some of the really powerful malts like the caramels and the crystal malts that give you almost that toffee note that I personally like. It's my favorite flavor to find in beer because I love malt so much. But then at the end of the spectrum, you get things like chocolate malt and black malt, and they're roasted. They're actually drum roasted. And much like a coffee bean. Yeah, much like a coffee bean. And there's kind of two ways to do that with the husk on, where you're actually getting the bittering of that. And that's where a lot of people might have had their first dark beer and had like a really bitter character to it because it was brewed with a ton of roasted barley and this like husked black malt. And that can kind of come across like astringent. But then there's other ones that are just there for the color. And these are things without the husk on. And they're actually quite sweet and pleasant to drink, but they really change that color. And so to get to the root of your question, I think is there's actually some flexibility in terms of color, but we have these style guidelines that direct us to what a beer should look like so that the consumer can understand it. But that's not to say that it's impossible to make the reverse. There's people that can make you a blonde stout, and there's people that could make you a black Coors Light. It's really about what's going to make the consumer understand what they should be experiencing with this beer, because beer, after all, is all about the experience. No one drinks it for anything other than that.
Right. Yeah, thinking about, I want to kind of go back to something you mentioned before when we were talking about like kind of those chocolate and coffee notes that we're getting from those more roasted malts. And there are also some beers that maybe actually have chocolate or coffee in them. Can we talk a bit about kind of where those flavors are coming from? Does it mean that they're throwing coffee into the beer, or they're throwing chocolate bars into a beer, or how does that really come about?
It could be either. You really have to look at the can in that sense, and they'll tell you whether it's just says beer, in which case you know that it's just the ingredients of beer, or whether it says something like with chocolate added or conditioned on coffee, those different things. But pretty much we have the ability to put so many different flavors into beer just with the basics of those ingredients. We're not going to get into hops tonight because this is a single hop beer just to bitter it a little bit. But between the flavors you can extract from chocolates, coffees, caramels, raisins in the malt, and then all the citrus things that you can get from hops or spices you can get from hops, there's a lot of beers that can be made, an infinite number of beers that can be made without needing to put anything else in it. But sometimes it's nice just to have that little extra touch of, oh, this had some real chocolate in that batch.
And then kind of going off of that, Bill in the chat was talking, you said blonde stouts. So how do you do a blonde stout with that color that's lighter without getting those, the dark coloring, but the right flavors into it? How would that happen?
So it depends on exactly what you're looking for in terms of that flavor. But really, when you're thinking about a stout, you're thinking about something with more mouthfeel that lingers around on your palate, and it has this much higher alcohol content. So you're boosting massive amounts of malt into that beer to drive all those characters up. And you're not going to let those sorts of you're not going to kind of allow those properties to defer from the basics besides that one color that you're trying to eliminate. So you might eliminate the roasted barley, for instance, so that you're not bringing in all the dark character, but you can use a whole array of different flavors. And I do know of a lot of places making blonde stouts where they will throw it on coffee for a couple hours before it's packaged, so that it has an actual coffee taste in a beer that's as clear as Bud Light.
I love a coffee blonde.
And then that coffee
good.
won't impart any color, right? That coffee
Right.
is just imparting the flavors and aromas.
Yeah. Usually, I mean, a lot comes down to how long it sits on there. If you've had recently like a beer that is conditioned on fruit, you might notice it's like a vibrant red or pink because they've had it on there for a couple days and allowed color to actually transfer. But if you're kind of just passing it through coffee beans, you're not going to pick up a ton of color there.
So I just want to make one thing clear. Everybody keeps referencing Barry and Santa. Barry, you live in Massachusetts. Santa lives in the North Pole. They are two different people that live in two different parts of the world.
Yes, absolutely correct.
Look at Barry's background. That is obviously a living room. Santa was in a corner by himself in the barn. Something I wanted to get into. We on City Brew tours and experiences, we always talk about the history of beer. Have we always been able to make darker beers? And if not, when did that change occur? And like, how did that come about?
Yeah. Beer has always, I guess beer has kind of always been a happenstance. Like the first beers were discovered almost on accident, and then we didn't really know how. We knew how to make them, but not why we knew how to make them for a long time.
Yeah.
And then at a certain point, we had essentially three different types of malt out there, and they were brown and amber and pale. And it was just kind of natural in that sense, which were the darker kernels or darker seeds at the end of the process, and whether they had perhaps been dried out by the heat of straw or the heat of wood, because that would depart a little bit different color to it. That's actually how like the porters came to be. Because they would start using all these darker malts that weren't getting used in the beers that were being drank more frequently. And so the porters started to drink these beers. And then at, let's say, 300 years ago, they actually discovered that they were going to be able to roast some of these grains. And they invented the drum roaster. And that's where we then went from just a drying process, we kind of elevated ourselves through the kilning process and now into the roasting process. And at that point, everything was fair game. And we now have a spectrum of color, and that kind of also correlates to the flavor of that grain as well, called the degrees Lovibond. And that goes from 1 degree Lovibond, which is super pale, looks like a piece of barley in the middle of the field. Like a straw grass, and then goes all the way up through 300, 400, 500. And these are malts that are completely black and just kind of suck the light in from everything around them. And there's all the different levels in between them now.
Yeah, and that's actually where chocolate malt gets its name from, right? It's not because it tastes like chocolate. It's because when you see chocolate malt after it's been roasted, it looks like little grains of chocolate.
And it has to be used really sparingly because it's so deep and rich that it can overpower a lot of the other grains in there. So this beer that you're drinking, I don't know for a fact, but I can tell you based on my own brewing history that this beer probably only has about 10% of the darker grains and is made up almost 90% of that one base malt. But they're able to control it because those flavors and colors are so rich with just little additions like that.
Yeah. We're actually getting some really interesting conversation I'd like to kind of move to from the chat. So City Brew Tours, for those who don't know, based mostly out of Boston right now, kind of the management team. So Barry, being somebody living in that area, people are wondering what your favorite brewery is out there. We're having a lot of love for Treehouse, some Trillium going on in the chat, but what do you have to say?
Yeah, I think there's so much great beer out everywhere, but I always gravitate towards the people that are really trying to do something for their community, and not necessarily the bigger names that people are hearing about around the country. And so in the Massachusetts area, I think the one that I go to all the time, and I'm always grabbing beer from when I can, is Bentwater, which is up in Lynn, and just doing so much for that area up there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they've been a great partner for us for sure.
Just recently expanded production like last year, right? Went from a small brew house to a pretty.
Yeah, they've been doing great beers and just a great taproom environment. Everything about them's really kind of core and central to what makes the craft beer community unique, and not just beer as an industry.
Yeah. I have to agree with Kirk again. We're like on the same page here. We got the chocolate out of the beer. Kirk mentioned Allagash in Maine. I guess people are talking about what places to check out, what their favorite New England places are. Allagash in Maine, especially with that lobster truck out front. Excellent.
Sounds so good.
But yeah, let's see what we have. Any other questions from the chat that we want to get to? Real quick, Prib Fam, I think I'm answering that right. What type of hops are used in this beer? And I'm not really sure, but that kind of leads me into a question for Barry is we've been talking so much about malt and what role they play in these darker beers. You talked about hops and bitterness and balancing out the beer. Does hop selection play a big role in designing porter recipes, or is it just kind of like whatever we got?
So it is a little bit involved in that process. You never want to just throw something into a batch that you don't know what what's going to happen. But in terms of like a porter or a stout, you're really only using that hop for the bittering. So you're going to put that into your boil for the full duration of that. And so this is a single Willamette hop that is that is used for this beer, and that's because they're just getting that bittering, and so that acid content to balance out all that sugar and sweetness inside there. And that's actually one of my tips for evaluating a brewery, is to try something like their amber ale as first beer when you go there, because if they have that balance right, and you can taste both sides of that flavor, you can get the hop character and that underlying malt quality, then you know they really know what they're doing.
Yeah. Cool. Well, that was a great discussion on malt. Before we wrap up here, Barry, is there anything you want to plug, want to let us know about?
Well, I actually want to answer this one question I saw in the Q&A that I don't think was answered.
Yes.
Under the radar beer destinations, and I
Yep.
think that's a great way for me to plug our tours, because
Exactly
I
what
really
I was going to do.
I did
really
this on purpose. I didn't skip that question. I did this totally on purpose. This was entirely planned.
We all are so excited to answer that for you.
all right, Julie, I'm gonna let you take that one then. You
Oh my
can
gosh.
do that in your wrap up.
I would love to answer anonymous attendee. Hopefully not a plant in the audience.
My
yeah,
daughter's
so-
name is anonymous. That's such a nice name.
What? Oh my gosh. Yeah. So yes, we at City Brew Tours have been doing in-person brewery tours since 2008. Of course, we had to shut those down for a bit. We're doing our virtual events, but when we start back up, we are in 12 cities across the country and also in Montreal. And we are going around taking people to breweries in person, taking them behind the scenes. You get to go to 3 or 4 breweries in a night. Or a day. If you like day drinking, you get to try a lot of different beers. You get to do beer and food pairings when we start doing those again. So we always go to nice local breweries in the different areas and teach you about both the brewery and the history of beer all in one night. So those are definitely a lot of fun, something to keep in mind when the world opens up again.
Yeah, we have Kirk, my brother from another mother, asking, do we do tours out here in the Northwest? We do have a location in Portland, Oregon, a absolute wonderful beer town with the most breweries per capita out of any city in the United States, I believe. But other than that, yeah, we're mostly located on the East Coast. We have 11 total locations running tours. Not right now. Whenever things get back to
Someday.
normal, we will be. Yeah, someday, hopefully in the future. So yeah.
Also have our live homebrew experience that you guys can do anywhere in the country with beer experts dressed just like me.
We all have those stylish shirts that we don.
And you would be brewing recipes designed by our very own Barry Hansen if you did
Hey.
one of those homebrew courses. I believe your amber and your brown ale variations of those recipes are available for people
Yes,
to brew.
that is true.
Cool. Well, awesome. So it's been a wonderful night. Barry, thanks again for joining us.
Thanks, guys. It's been a blast.
Cool.
Oh, Rick wants to get one of those shirts. Rick, you can become a expert beer guide with City Brew Tours. Be sure to check us out. We're doing virtual events right now.
Steve really wants to know what's behind the curtain, and I'm sorry to let him down that it's my washer and dryer.
It is not a Santa suit, Steve. It is not a Santa suit. I don't
All
know
right,
why you
well,
think
thanks.
that.
Thanks, Barry. I'm going to kick you off here because that
All
is
right.
how we do.
Bye, guys.
Yeah.
Bye. Thanks, Barry.
Well, Barry was great. Definitely better than that jerk Santa.
I know, so much better. It was a good conversation.
And they're definitely not. They're definitely different people.
Oh,
So
absolutely different people, of course.
different people for sure. Living in different places. So as a reminder, we're posting new content every night at citybrewtours.com/Christmas. So be sure to check it out. Tonight's blog was already posted and is about the difference between porters and stouts, and was written by the amazing Kalima, our queen of QuickBooks at City Brew Tours.
Kalima is the queen of everything, Brian. She should be, at least. So tomorrow we'll be opening our 5th window in the box. So be sure to hop on with us at 8 Eastern. And you'll also get to meet a new co-host tomorrow.
What? You're not coming back?
No, I'm tired of you, Brian. I'm leaving.
Oh, well. Okay, then. In that case, good night, everyone. And join me tomorrow when apparently I have to find a new co-host. I mean,
I still
guess
get to drink the beer though, right? Even if I'm not here, I can still drink it.
Sure. I mean, we can't retroactively come and take your beer back from you, but I guess I have to find a co-host. I could call Santa.
Oh, Steve, I'm so sorry. I'll miss you too.
That might go off the rails. I could probably get The Rock. He does a lot of stuff that people don't
Replace me
expect.
with The Rock, Brian?
I don't know.
You can do better than that.
Throw your suggestions for another co-host in the chat. Have a good night, everybody. I'll see you
Z-Man.
tomorrow. I'll figure something out. We got another great beer, I'm sure.